Hello friends, today we are going to study Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. Woodrow Wilson is an idealist who is a peace-loving person, who was the President of the United States of America, and he made efforts to bring peace in Europe at the end of First World War. So he has started his peace efforts during 1918. On January 8, 1918, he has given 14 points for the end of First World War. These proposals or these points are well known, are very famously known as Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. And these points have become the basis for the end of First World War. As we all know, First World War was held between 1914 to 1918. The First World War was held due to the immediate cause of the First World War was the shooting down of Archduke Ferdinand, the Austro-Hungarian prince, and his wife in a place called Sarajevo, the Bosnian capital, by a Serbian nationalist. So the war was held between two military alliances. On the one side, the Central Powers headed by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. On the other side, headed by Great Britain, France, Russia, and United States of America. So the war, the First World War, that's called as the first ever World War, and it was fought among the powers of the Europe, and later in course of its war, its progress, countries of other continents also have joined in it. That's why it is called as the First World War. So the end of the First World War became possible only with Woodrow Wilson's intervention. Woodrow Wilson, the then American president, initiated the peace process and brought all the warring factions to the table, and he made certain proposals which are known as the famous Woodrow Wilson 14-point proposals to end the First World War. Former President of USA, Woodrow Wilson, proposed 14 points for the end of First World War. Here we can see the picture of Woodrow Wilson as the former President of United States of America. He was a peace-loving person. He was an idealist, and he wanted the devastation, the displacement, and human loss of innocent lives and soldiers, the lives of soldiers, and damage to the properties of the people should be stopped. And he has proposed for the progress of the civilization all the 14 points, particularly to end the First World War. That's why they are called as the Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. Woodrow Wilson played a very key role in bringing an end to international anarchy presented through First World War. As we all know, the 20th century Europe has faced a situation of international anarchy where all the powers were feeling themselves as great powers, and they were not obedient to each other, and they were even rousing the emotions of the people in favor of the war. There was growing militarism, there were secret alliances among the states, there was also colonialism and colonial competition between colonial masters. All these causes has led to the sudden outburst of First World War in 1914, and Woodrow Wilson played a key role to end the war, and this war was held for 4.5 years. It started in July 28, 1914 and ended in November 1918. So it was a war that was fought for almost 4.5 years, from 1914 to 1918. Here in this context, Woodrow Wilson played a key role in bringing an end to international anarchy. It is called as anarchy because there were no laws, international laws. There was no international authority to counsel the warring factions or to counsel the nations against the war and in favor of the peace. So it was called an anarchic situation. So the anarchy was globalized. So it was called international anarchy. And the First World War was an ample example for the existence of international anarchy. And no power was heeding to the words of other powers. England, France, Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary, Turkey, Italy, every power thought that it only is a superpower and it did not need to heed the counseling of other powers. So this is how there was no authority to counsel the countries. There was no law to control or regulate the tensions among the nations. That's what is called as anarchy, anarchic situation. It's called international anarchy. It is presented through the First World War. And Woodrow Wilson played a very key role to bring an end to this international anarchy. And he's proposed for the first time an international government to prevent future wars. And his proposal was materialized as League of Nations. League of Nations was established in 1920. That was the first ever government at the world level to prevent the tensions among the nations and to prevent the prospective wars, particularly the world wars. So Woodrow Wilson played a key role to bring an end to the international anarchy, which was presented through the First World War. And Woodrow Wilson proposed the 14 principles on January 8th, 1918. When the war was commenced in July 1914, it went on for 4 years, 1914, 15, 16, 17, and there was no hope in the near sight for the end of the war. At that point of time, Woodrow Wilson intervened and negotiated with the warring factions, warring countries, and proposed his 14 points on January 8th, 1918. So there was a great deal of discussion on his 14 points, and at the end of 11 months of his proposal, all the 14 points were incorporated in the Treaty of Versailles and other treaties, Paris Peace Treaty and other treaties, and the international organization called the League of Nations was established. So it is the Woodrow Wilson who proposed the 14 principles on January 8th, 1918, that has promised the world to bring peace. So this Woodrow Wilson proposed the 14 principles on January 8th, 1918. And as we all know, First World War broke out in 1914 AD and ended in 1918 AD. It was a war which was fought for 4.5 years, and millions of people lost their lives, and millions of families are separated or broken, and millions of people migrated with fear of insecurity to neighboring countries, and millions of pounds of property, worth property is damaged. So this is the First World War remained a human devastation in the history of humankind, and First World War broke out in 1914 AD and ended in 1918 AD. In fact, European powers were responsible for the war. England, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Turkey, Russia. These are the principal powers in 1914, and these European powers are responsible for the war. And there are various reasons for the war. These reasons can be summed up as follows. The Germany's quest for a world power by capturing colonies is one reason, and Italy's desire for achieving irredentism or the past glory is another reason, and France's desire to get back its two areas, Alsace-Lorraine, from Germany is another reason, and restoring the Belgium neutrality by England is one reason. So likewise, there are so many reasons for the commencement of the First World War, and most of the European powers are responsible for the war. And though European powers were responsible for the war and commenced a war within the European continent, in course of time, the war extended itself to other continents, and various countries of other continents also have participated in this. So that's why it has assumed a large proportion of world war, and it has claimed itself as the first world war. So though European powers were responsible for the war, many countries of other continents also participated in the war. The First World War was held between two military alliances. The first one is Central Powers. The second one is Allied Powers. The Central Powers were headed by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. And Allied Powers were United Kingdom, France, Russia, and USA. In fact, USA has joined the war at a later part of the war. It had joined only in 1917 when its naval ship Lusitania was submerged by the German forces in North Atlantic Ocean. So, United States of America was a late entrant into the First World War, but it sided with Allied powers, United Kingdom, France, Russia, and United States of America. All the four countries headed the Allied powers, and against this, there are Central powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Serbia, and Turkey. In fact, the war is started with two important nations, Austria-Hungary on one side and Serbia on the other side. The immediate reason for the war is shooting dead of the Austrian-Hungarian prince, Ferdinand, Archduke Ferdinand, by a Serbian nationalist in Bosnian capital Sarajevo. That was the immediate reason. And Austria-Hungary gave an ultimatum to Serbia for an apology. And Serbia eventually refused for that. And as a result, Austria-Hungary declared a war against Serbia. And in course of time, Serbia was supported by Russia. And Austria-Hungary was supported by Germany. When Germany supported Austria-Hungary, France supported the Serbia and Russia. In course of time, when Belgium neutrality was violated, England also entered into war, and England sided with Allied powers. So with the submerging of its naval ship Lusitania, and United States of America also joined in the war with almost 12 lakh soldiers in the company of Allied powers. And likewise, Turkey also joined the war in favor of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Serbia. This is how there are two important strategic military alliances that fought a war. The first one is Central Powers, the second one is the Allied powers. And among these powers, there are certain old kingdoms, old empires, and there are certain new empires. Austria-Hungary, Turkey, Russia were the old empires. And France, UK, and Germany were the new empires. The old empires were headed by the kings and kingdoms, the empires. Austria-Hungary was headed by the Habsburg dynasty, and Turkey was headed by an Ottoman Khalifa. That was part of an Ottoman empire, and Sultan Khalifa was heading it. And Russia was headed by the Romanov dynasty. Romanov. And likewise, with industrialization, three more countries have become empires. They are German Empire, Great Britain Empire, or UK Empire, or France Empire. So there are three old empires and three new empires, and which ultimately quarreled with each other, made a competition against each other, and there was a scramble for influencing and catching the colonial areas in Asia, Africa, and Latin America by the powers of the Europe, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Turkey, UK, France, Russia. So there was a scramble for colonies. That was also the reason for the First World War. So First World War fought between two military alliances, the Central Powers and the Allied powers. The Central Powers were headed by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. And Allied powers were headed by UK, France, Russia, and United States of America. In the First World War, millions of people lost their lives. Millions of people migrated to other countries, and property worth millions of pounds damaged. As I've told you in the beginning, it was a war of human devastation. It impacted the lives of the people like anything. Millions of people lost their lives, millions of innocent people, millions of soldiers, millions of army personnel lost their lives. And likewise, millions of people migrated to other countries with fear of insecurity. There are millions of families who are broken down and migrated to other countries. So all the families are also broken down. And millions of pounds of property, worth property damaged. So it's the first ever human devastation in the human history. That's why First World War has experienced and witnessed millions of people lost their lives, millions of people migrated to other countries, and property worth millions of pounds damaged. That's why this was a very bad incident in the human history, and there were efforts like Woodrow Wilson's efforts to bring peace, to halt the process of devastation and show the human civilization a ray of hope. That's why Woodrow Wilson initiated the peace process. In today's lesson plan, we'll discuss about Woodrow Wilson's initiative and what is the context of his initiative. That's the first point. After that, what is the impact of the First World War? What are the main results of the First World War? The crumbling down of four major empires, loss of life, displacement, and damages of property, and international anarchy. So these are the main results of the First World War. Though there are so many results of First World War, but the main impact of First World War on human civilization is crumbling down of four major empires, loss of life, displacement, and damages of property, and international anarchy. These are the three important impacts on world politics and international relations. This we'll be discussing. After that, we'll discuss point by point all the 14 points of Woodrow Wilson. So first we'll discuss Woodrow Wilson's initiative and what is the context of the Woodrow Wilson's initiative. And Woodrow Wilson has initiated the peace process in the year 1918. In fact, the war started in 1914. On 1914, June 28, Archduke Ferdinand was murdered and assassinated in Serbia. And Austria-Hungary gave an ultimatum to Serbia to apologize within 1 month. In the context of its failure, Serbia's failure to render apologies to Austria-Hungary, Austria-Hungary declared a war against Serbia. So this is the context of First World War. And First World War, though began as a local war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, but it assumed global proportions with the entry of many superpowers. Russia entered on the side of Serbia. Germany entered on the side of Austria-Hungary. When Russia and Serbia were unitedly fighting against Austria-Hungary, Germany entered into Austria-Hungary side. When Germany entered into Austria-Hungary side, France entered into Serbia's side. When France entered into Serbia's side, Germany wanted to destroy France, and it has violated the Belgium neutrality. When Belgium neutrality was violated, England wanted to restore the Belgium neutrality and entered into the war in favor of Serbia, Russia, England also entered into the war. So this is how it started with a local cause, local matter, but in course of time it assumed global proportions with the entry of many superpowers, either on one side or the other side. There are two important political alliances, military alliances that fought the war. The first one is Central Powers. The second one is Allied Powers. The Central Powers was headed by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey, and of course Serbia. And Allied Powers were headed by United Kingdom, that's called the Great Britain, France, Russia, and United States of America. So this is all. When war started in 1914, the war was a local issue. But in 1915, 16, and 17, it assumed global proportions, and many countries of other continents also joined the war. That's how The European war has become a world war. The countries of Asia, Africa, South America, North America, Australian continent also have joined into the war. This is how the local war within the European continent assumed the proportion of a global war, and it has become a global war. And the end of the war is not in the near sight by 1917. And in the 1980, a statesman and a peace-loving statesman of United States of America, Woodrow Wilson, has determined to end the war, and he came out with 14 proposals. And before proposing these 14 proposals, Woodrow Wilson also discussed the matter with German leaders, Turkish leaders, English leaders, French leaders, and various other leaders who are in the war path. So Woodrow Wilson's initiative came in 1918, when chances of the end of the war are unabated and they are not in the near sight. Then only Woodrow Wilson initiated the peace process. And Woodrow Wilson is an idealist and is a peace-loving person. And he proposed the 14 principles, both theoretical and practical, empirical. So he has given a orientation, value orientation to the principles, and he has proposed certain long-range answers for the strategic problems that 20th century world was facing. This is how Woodrow Wilson's initiative was in the context of a kind of an international anarchy, when no country was heeding the directions of other country. So this is how Woodrow Wilson's initiative has a context, and the world is facing devastating war with millions of people losing their lives, and millions of families are migrating themselves to the other countries in fear of insecurity, and millions of pounds of properties are damaged. Then there was no sight of ending the war by 1970. Then Woodrow Wilson came forward and proposed his 14 points. This is how the context of Woodrow Wilson's proposals can be discussed. And today's lesson then, we'll first know about the impact of First World War. As an impact of First World War, we can say the crumbling down of 4 major empires. As I've told you in the beginning itself, Europe has certain 3 old empires and 3 new empires. In Europe, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Turkish Empire, and Russian Empire are considered as the oldest empires. The Turkish Empire was headed by Khalifa. It was called as Ottoman Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire was headed by the Habsburg dynasty kings. And likewise, the Russian Empire was headed by Romanov dynasty, Romanov. So these are the 3 old kingdoms and empires. And there are new empires like United Kingdom, France, and Germany was the new empires. They have become empires because they have achieved the colonial status. They have become colonial powers with the acquisition of so many colonies. And they have also achieved industrial revolution, and the industrial capital that they have achieved through industrial revolution is moved from one area to another area, and they have expanded the industrial capital, and they have made so many colonies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. This is how these 3 have become new empires: Britain, France, and Germany. So as a result of First World War, 4 major empires were crumbled down. Among them, first one is the Habsburg dynasty in Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire of Turkey, led by Sultan Khalifa, and Romanov dynasty of Russia, and Hohenzollern dynasty, the Hohenzollern dynasty of Germany. So these are the 4 major empires that were crumbled down as a result of First World War. And as a result of First World War, there is loss of life, displacement, and damages of property. Millions of people have lost their lives. Most of the people are innocent people, and most of them are soldiers, army people, the military personnel. Likewise, there are also people who are workers, middle classes, lower middle classes, and poorer sections. So loss of life, displacement, migration, large scale migration, separation of people from families, and fear and insecurity among the minds of the people. And likewise, damages of property. Millions of worth of pounds of property is damaged in the First World War. So this is the impact. And in fact, this is the context in which Woodrow Wilson has put forth his peace proposals on January 8, 1918. And likewise, there is a kind of an international anarchy. In an anarchic situation, no country is willing to follow an international law. No country is in a position to heed the advice of the wisdom of elders. No country is in a position to bestow its confidence on the peace process. No country is in the process of peace. So this is a kind of an anarchic situation at the global level. It started in Europe and later extended itself into other parts of the globe also. So this is called as international anarchy. In such an international anarchic situation, Woodrow Wilson initiated the process of peace with his 14 points, and that's why it is famously known as Wilson's 14 points. Now let us discuss the Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. Woodrow Wilson made an appeal to the countries that countries should have open alliances and open treaties in the place of secret diplomacy. As we all know, First World War is the result of secret alliances. As a result of secret alliances, no country was trusting the other country. There were distrust, misfaith, there was no faith or trust among the countries. So as a result, every country was suspecting the other country. So in such a situation, it is not possible to bring confidence among the countries. That's why Wilson, as a first point, he has suggested that open alliances and treaties must be in place of secret diplomacy. That's the first point, the first ever point, because the First World War is the result of secret alliances that he has realized. And to bring out the world from the clutches of war and promote confidence among the minds of the people and leaders. And he has suggested that open diplomacy should be in the place of secret diplomacy. And this open diplomacy is possible only with open alliances and open treaties. So this is the first ever point. And second one is freedom for navigation and use of seas. And he wanted that all the countries should respect the laws of the oceans. And he has suggested that freedom of navigation and accessibility to navigation on international waters should be free, and use of seas by all the countries should be a right. So that's how freedom for navigation and use of seas is another important aspect that Woodrow Wilson has said. In fact, Woodrow Wilson proposed this freedom of navigation and use of seas because one of its ships is naval ship, Lusitania, was submerged by the German forces in 1917. And America was the loser, and many of its American innocent people lost their lives with the submerging of the Lusitania in North Atlantic Ocean. So that's why he has suggested that freedom of navigation, freedom for navigation and use of seas, the second important point that Woodrow Wilson has come forward with. And thirdly, remove barriers to international trade. In fact, he has considered free trade or international trade without any barriers. Presently, we call it as globalization, liberalization, privatization, and globalization strategy, LPG strategy. And this strategy denounce any barriers for international trade. And likewise, Woodrow Wilson also suggested removal of barriers to international trade. And he says, no country should put barriers on free trade. All the countries should benefit and shall have the right to benefit itself from its free trade. So remove barriers to international trade. And he suggested free trade among the countries. That is his worthwhile suggestion. And fourth one is reduction of armaments by all the nations. In fact, the very reason for First World War is militarism. Many countries have fought the First World War because they are already prepared with their armaments. They are prepared with their armaments, and they have enlarged their armies, and they have also built their naval ships. So with the growing militarism of England, France, Germany in a competitive manner led to tensions in European continent. That's why militarism is considered as an important factor for the world war. So Woodrow Wilson suggested that reduction of armaments by all the nations, however big or however small, all the nations should reduce their armaments, and this only is possible for the establishment of peace at the global level. So reduction of armaments by all the nations is his fourth point. In fact, countries like Germany, Russia, England, France used to have lakhs of military personnel, lakhs of army, lakhs of soldiers, and who went to far off lands on behest of their countries and fought the war against each other. So this is all armaments, military, growth of militarism, and acquiring submarines and also naval ships, fleets, that was considered as a reason for the war. That's why Woodrow Wilson suggested that reduction of armaments by all the nations would only ensure peace at the global level. That's why reduction of armaments is considered as a fourth important point of Woodrow Wilson's proposals. And fifth one is impartial adjustments of colonial claims and attention to the interests of subject populations. There are two important issues involved in this. One is adjustments in the colonial claims. That means all the countries have colonial claims, particularly the European countries, France, Britain, Portugal, Spain, Germany, Italy. They have acquired colonies. In fact, England, France, Spain, Portugal, Netherlands have acquired colonies right from 17th century itself. And by the end of 19th century, these powers have established big empires with their colonies. But Germany and Italy are the late entrants. Germany was unified in 1870 and Italy was unified in 1860. As a result of their entry, they could not get more colonies to control. That's why these two countries wanted more and more colonies as equivalent as the English Empire and French Empire. That's why there was a kind of conflict between England and Germany, England and France. Likewise, Italy and France, Italy and England. So that's why there was also a scramble for Africa. In fact, all the countries were competing with each other in having spheres of influence, protectorates, colonial areas in Germany, in African continent. As a result, in 1858, there was also a conference held, and virtually Africa was divided into various areas and sub-areas, and they have divided themselves among themselves all the areas. Some countries have established colonies directly, and some countries have established protectorates, and some countries have established spheres of influence. So this is how there were colonial scramble. There is scramble for colonial areas. So Woodrow Wilson suggested that impartial adjustment should be done of the colonial claims of various nations of Europe. This would reduce the tensions among the European powers who are having the colonial areas under their control. And in addition to this, he has also suggested that attention should also be paid to the interests of the subject population. In fact, in many countries, nationalist movements were on the verge. So he suggested that the interests of the subject populations should also need attention. And some countries also need the right to self-determination. And they are fighting for their political independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity, and self-governance. So he suggested that the interests of the subject population who are fighting for the nationalist demands and political independence should also be given independence, should also be given attention. And the attention to the interests of the subject populations in Asia and Africa, the colonial people, the colonies, the people of the colonies also need to be addressed. So this is how, in one important proposal, he made two important claims. One is impartial adjustments of colonial claims among the European countries. That is one thing. And attention to the interests of subject populations, the colonial areas, the populations of the colonial areas. So wherever there were nationalist movements, he suggested political independence to those areas where nationalist movements are very high. In fact, India was having the nationalist movement with non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement, Quit India movement. The nationalist movement was very high. The nationalist aspirations of the people were demanding for political independence. So Woodrow Wilson suggested that the interests of the subject population should also be paid attention. And at the same time, impartial adjustment should be made among the European powers on colonial claims. So this is the fifth point. And sixth point is rearrangements of territories given up by Russia on the basis of self-determination. In fact, Russia has achieved independence, which a revolution in 1917. Russia signed a treaty with Germany, the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, and has ended the war in 1917 itself with the achievement of October Revolution led by Lenin, Vladimir Lenin. Russia has withdrawn itself from the war, and it has left certain areas, certain territories. And Woodrow Wilson suggested that whatever the areas that are left by Russia, and those areas should be given the right to self-determination, and people can choose their own governments and they can get their own political independence. So he suggested that granting of independence to all the territories given up by Russia and the rearrangements of territories. So that's an important point that he has given. And Woodrow Wilson's another important point is should evacuate Belgium. Belgium neutrality should be restored. Belgium neutrality should be restored. That means when Germany invaded Belgium to reach France and attack France, Belgium neutrality was violated. And Woodrow Wilson suggested that Belgium neutrality should be restored. So having neutral position is a right of Belgium. So that right should be respected. And England's protection for Belgium neutrality is valid according to Woodrow Wilson. And also Woodrow Wilson reinforced the idea of England to restore the neutrality of Belgium, and he has suggested that Belgium should be having the neutral status and Belgium neutrality should be restored, and German forces should evacuate themselves from the areas of Belgium. In fact, the German forces entered into Belgium and reached France, Paris. To attack Paris and France, Germany requires a short route, and that short route is facilitated by the Belgium. and Belgium was not permitting the German forces enter into its territory. And German forces have forcefully entered into Belgium and they passed through Belgium and entered into Paris and France. That's why the Belgium neutrality was violated. But Belgium neutrality should be restored. And according to Woodrow Wilson's seventh point, Belgium neutrality is very important and its neutrality should be respected. That is one of the best points that he has suggested. And the eighth point is Alsace-Lorraine should be restored to France. In fact, the First World War began between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, but in course of time, France and Germany also entered into the war. Why France and Germany entered into the war? France entered into the war in favor of Serbia, and Germany entered into the war in favor of Austria-Hungary. Why these two powers have entered into the war? Because Germany and France have an old issue of border dispute. In 1870, there was a war between Germany and France. That war was known as the Franco-Prussian War. In the Franco-Prussian War, Germany was victorious. Germany, then it was called as Prussia. So when Prussia was victorious in the war, Germany got two important areas of France to its hold. Those two areas are called Alsace and Lorraine. These Alsace and Lorraine are mineral-rich areas which have iron ore deposits, and to which country these two areas become a part, that country will definitely achieve industrial revolution and industrial prosperity. So that's why these two areas are very important for the prosperity of either France or Germany. When Germany took over these two areas in the Franco-Prussian War from France, France is persistently trying to get back these two areas from Germany. That's why Alsace-Lorraine has become an international dispute. It has become a bone of contention between Germany and France. So Woodrow Wilson suggested that Alsace-Lorraine were the two areas which are inherently belonged to France for centuries together, and only during Franco-Prussian War these two areas were captured by Germany. That's why he suggested that Alsace-Lorraine area should be restored with France. So he suggested Germany to evacuate Alsace-Lorraine and restore it to France. That is another important proposal that he has made. And his ninth proposal is boundaries of Italy should be rectified on the basis of nationality. So he suggested that the boundaries of Italy should be rectified on the basis of nationality. So Italy was demanding for irredentism. Irredentism means the revival of past glory. In fact, Italy was the capital of the Roman Catholic Church, and Italy has a past glory. Italy wanted to revive its past glory. That was called as irredentism. So when irredentism was desired by Italy, Woodrow Wilson suggested that boundaries of Italy should be rectified on the basis of nationality. So that is an important suggestion that he has made. And the 10th point he has suggested, all the nationalities of Austria-Hungary should get their right to self-government. In fact, Austria and Hungary, these are the two important countries which were united during the First World War, known as Austria-Hungarian Empire. So after the First World War, Austria and Hungary were separated and two countries, two nation states were given. And within Austria and within Hungary also, there were so many nationalities fighting for the right to self-government, the right to self-determination. They are the nationalities, ethnic nationalities, who are fighting for the self-government. And he suggested that all the nationalities, whoever is fighting for political independence, these nationalities should be granted political independence. So all the nationalities of Austria-Hungarian Empire, should get the right to self-government. This is another important suggestion that Woodrow Wilson has made. And 11th suggestion that Woodrow Wilson made was freedom of Serbia, Montenegro, and Romania should be maintained. In fact, the First World War was the result of the murder of Archduke Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary by the Serbian nationalists. And Serbia was living with insecurity and fear. So he suggested that smaller countries like Serbia, Montenegro, and Romania, freedom should be given, and their freedom should be respected, and their territorial integrity should be protected. So that's how freedom of Serbia, Montenegro, and Romania should be maintained. And these states were previously called as the Balkan states, and some of these areas were part of the old Turkish Empire. So they fought for the political independence and got their independence. So freedom of Serbia, Montenegro, and Romania should be maintained. This is another important suggestion that was made by Woodrow Wilson. This is the 11th suggestion. And Turkey should have a pure Turkish empire. There are so many areas, nationalities fighting for right to self-determination in Turkey. And Turkey was in the wake of disintegration during the early part of 20th century. That's why Turkey was very often quoted as the sick man of Europe, because at any point of time it may disintegrate. There was political instability looming around the Turkey for at least for the whole of 19th and 20th century, for the whole of 19th century and first 2 decades of 20th century. So he suggested that some parts of Turkey where the Turkish population is small only is called as pure Turkish Empire, and the remaining areas of Turkey should have granted independence. All the nationalities whoever is fighting for political independence and the status of nation state should have the right to self-determination. That's why Turkey should have a pure Turkish empire, and other areas of Turkey should be given independence. That is another important aspect. And likewise, free state of Poland should be established. There is one nationality called Poles. They're also fighting for a nationhood, and they wanted a nation state. And he suggested that a Poland should be created, and a Poland should also have a naval airport, the naval port, that's called Danzig port. So free state of Poland should be established. The freedom of Poland should be ensured, and free state of Poland should be established. And likewise, among the important points, the last point is an international organization should be established for protecting the territorial integrity of the nations. So he has suggested that there should be an international government, a global government, to control all the nation states. Otherwise, every country becomes egoistic, every country may suffer with narrow nationalism and hatred towards other nations. So that's why there should be an international law or international lawmaking body and an international government authority to control all the nation states. The behavior of the nation state should be controlled by an international organization. And he has suggested that an international organization should be established to protect the security and territorial integrity of all the nations. And as a result of his suggestion, League of Nations was established in 1920 to protect the territorial integrity and security of all the countries on the principle of collective security. So a new principle evolved in 20th century global politics, that's called the collective security. And collective security was the basis for the establishment of United Nations and also the League of Nations. During the First World War, Woodrow Wilson has proposed that an international organization should be established for protecting the territorial integrity of the nations. And this organization would also stop the international anarchy, the anarchic trends that were prevailing in different parts of the Europe in general, the world in general, and Europe in particular. That's why an international organization to put an end to international anarchy and protect the territorial integrity of the nations should also be established. So these are the 14 points. The 14th point facilitates the establishment of League of Nations and the first ever the global government for protecting the security of the people on the principle of collective security and territorial integrity of the nations. So this is how Woodrow Wilson has suggested 14 points. These 14 points were very important points. And some points have suggested remedies for the causes of the First World War. What are the causes of First World War? Secret alliances. And what is the remedy that he has suggested? He wanted open diplomacy in the place of secret alliances. And what is the reason for First World War? The colonial claims and colonial scramble for colonial areas by all the European nations. And he has suggested impartial adjustment of colonial claims. And likewise, another important reason for the First World War is growing militarism. And he has suggested that all the nations should reduce their armaments. And another important reason for First World War is the France desire to get back its Alsace-Lorraine from German fold. And he has suggested that France is rightfully own Alsace-Lorraine and other areas, and Germany should concede these areas to France. So this is how he has studied the reasons for First World War, and he has suggested remedies for the peace process. And he is a peace-loving person. He has become an idealist, and he has established the idealism in international politics by suggesting peace initiatives to end the First World War. And Woodrow Wilson stands as a stalwart statesman and a peace-loving person in the history of the world in general and Europe and America in particular. That's how he has suggested very pertinent and peace-loving proposals for the establishment of peace. He has suggested these proposals, 14 proposals, in the context of growing international anarchism, when all the countries were arrogant, all the countries were not heeding with each other. There was no mutual respect. There was no authority to control or regulate the behavior of the national states when international anarchy was prevailing at the global level and more particularly at the European level. He has suggested that an international government should be established. And on the lines of his suggestions, League of Nations is established as the first ever world government to control the nation states and to guide them for the progress of human civilization. So this is how Woodrow Wilson has an important place in the history of mankind, as he has prevented the continuation of First World War for another some more years, and he has virtually halted the First World War with his peace proposals, and his peace proposals have become the rallying point for the Paris Peace Treaty that was signed in 1918-1919. So Woodrow Wilson's 14 points have become an important foundation for the establishment of peace in 20th century in the world in general and Europe in particular. So though he is not an European by himself, he belongs to America. He was a former American president. And he has suggested these proposals by aptly understanding all the causes for the First World War. And he made some concrete solutions and suggestions for the end of First World War and establishing peace throughout the world. So this is how Woodrow Wilson stands a very important place in the history of world and Europe. Of course, in America. Thank you very much, friends. Thank you.